Okay, good evening. Looks like we've got two guests so far for this part of the webinar. So I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes, allow everybody to join before getting into the actual webinar itself. So for the time being, any of our early joiners, if you've got just a few little questions you might want to ask, feel free to drop them into the Q&A facility on the Zoom platform. So, like I say before, I'm going to start the actual webinar in earnest and go through my small presentation. I'm just going to wait for the participants to fill up. Let's see how many attendees have we got. Got quite a few joining. Right, great stuff. Wait till we get about 20, I think, attending, then I'll start. I wonder if people are still waiting to join. Okay, doesn't seem to be many more people joining at this point, so I'm going to get right into it. Okay, so welcome everybody to my part of the Language Show webinar, and it's going to be about using languages in the United Kingdom's armed forces. So basically, the main points I'm going to cover on this evening's webinar is the language schemes which are used in the UK armed forces. How we assess those languages, which is using the Ministry of Defence Language Assessment Board, or known as the ModLab for short. The financial incentives, which can make using languages in the UK armed forces quite attractive to its personnel. The long language training, which can be undertaken for particular trades within the armed forces. So essentially, our linguists. And we're going to rush over the sort of details about being an operator technical intelligence linguist, so an OPTIL, which are members of the British Army's Intelligence Corps. So basically, there are two main language schemes in the UK Armed Forces. These are the Basic Language Award Scheme, which is open to basically any service person who may have a foreign language spoken or written, or any of the other disciplines of languages. And then we also have the Defence Operational Language Award Scheme. So this is for the particular languages which have been identified by the Ministry of Defence as being an operational requirement all the time. The overarching administrative authority for all language schemes in the UK Armed Forces is the Defence Requirements Authority for Culture and Language, or DRACL for short, which does sound a little bit ominous, but no, it's basically they're the people who sort of establish what languages are required and when they need to be exploited, essentially. So moving on to the Basic Language Award Scheme, what this does is it recognises service personnel's abilities in all languages. So it doesn't matter really, whether you are a linguist by trade or not. You could be a medic, you could be a chef, you could be an engineer, you could be a pilot in the Royal Air Force, or just a sailor in the Royal Navy. If you have an additional language other than English, which you are proficient in, this is what this scheme recognises. So yeah, like I say, it is open to all three services: the Army, Navy, Royal Air Force, regardless of your trade or your cap badge. And it allows the Ministry of Defence to identify service personnel with any language abilities which can be exploited on operational deployments. These can be during operations, or they can be ad hoc. So there might be an emerging event somewhere in the world where the UK Armed Forces might be required to deploy, and they would need a language capability in that theatre. So underneath, under the basic language award scheme, spoken languages or all languages are categorized into three groups, with group one being the hardest languages, as you can see here on the screen. This includes Arabic, Chinese, Farsi, Japanese, Pashto. And then you've got group two, which are sort of middle difficulty or medium difficulty languages, including Polish, Russian, Bosnian. And finally, then you've got the group three languages, which are the easiest. So these tend to be the Germanic languages, which have been identified as being the ones easiest to learn for somebody who has English as their first spoken language. And the source of this information comes from Joint Service Publication 752. So this is an open source piece of information. So if anybody, after the webinar wishes to read up a bit more in detail on the policy for the use of language in the UK Armed Forces, you are free to sort of search this up on the internet, and you can find all this information in open source. So that moves us onto the Defence Operational Language Award Scheme, or DOLAS for short. So this identifies the designated operational languages which are used by the UK Armed Forces, and this language can be used either non-deployed or deployed. So non-deployed is basically where the linguist will be stationed somewhere in the UK. However, they will be using the language for their day-to-day responsibilities, essentially for the daily duties. Whereas deployed is where somebody with particular language skills might be required to fly overseas to an operational theatre where that particular language is required in order to maintain operational effectiveness for UK and also armed forces. However, these defence operational languages will usually be taught on a long language course. So these tend to be reserved for linguists in the three armed services, but we'll touch more on that a bit later on in the presentation. So under the Defence Operational Language Scheme, there are 6 current operational languages. However, there are more which are being identified all the time. These are currently Arabic, which is spoken in the Middle East, Dari, which is spoken in Afghanistan, Farsi, which is spoken in Iran, Pashto as well from Afghanistan, and Russian and Somali. And I think it goes without saying, why these languages are so in need at the moment in order to be exploited operationally. So under the DOLAS, there are also languages apart from those 6 which can be required for specific operations. So let's say there is might be some sort of crisis going on anywhere in the world where English may not be the spoken language, and if service personnel have that particular language recorded in their records, their personnel records, the MOD is then able to identify them, and they could be called up to go and support operations in any particular theatre. So the deployed operational use of any language, so not just the operational languages which I mentioned earlier on the DOLAS scheme, will attract payment under DOLAS. So you could speak French, for instance, and if you're required to go to a country such as Sierra Leone, where French is the main spoken language, in order to support an operation there, then you could potentially receive language payment under the DOLAS scheme, making it, essentially the payments do become, more sort of attractive, should we say. However, in order for a language to be exploited under the DOLAS scheme, a linguist must achieve a functional level as a minimum. And we'll touch more on that later as well when we get to the actual MOD Language Assessment Board details. So the MOD Language Assessment Board itself, or MODLAB for short, this is used to determine the proficiency in a service person's 4 areas of language ability, which are listening, speaking, reading and writing. And for each of these areas, the service person will be awarded what's known as the Standardized Language Profile, SLP points, depending on how proficient they are in each of the 4 areas. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, the ModLab has been conducted online. So it used to be face-to-face done at Shrivenham, where it results the location of the DCLC, the Defence Centre for Languages and Culture. However, since the pandemic and the sort of advent of everybody moving online, it's a lot easier for these to be conducted online, still under exam conditions, of course. So in order to get yourself, or for a service person to get themselves onto an MOD language assessment board, they have to be proactive in this. They have to identify themselves to their chain of command. They can't just assume that the MOD will somehow know that they can speak, they're proficient in the language. So they have to go to their chain of command. So look, Sir Mark, I am proficient in this language. I feel that I would be able to excel in it and get a good grade on an MOD language examination board, assessment board. They have to be able to sort of verify where they know this language from. They can't say, oh, I have a friend who speaks this language and they've taught me a few words. Actually, because obviously it does cost the MOD money for people to be assessed on their language skills, so it has to be credible sort of application for it. And obviously the service person should always take adequate time for preparation. So once they have had their application to sit the language assessment board approved by their chain of command, and the application has gone into DRACL, the overarching body, then they will receive joining instructions, which will give them details of how they're going to get this, how the actual board looks, what the process is, and they will also be given a few weeks before the assessment subject on which they will have to do their speaking. So the speaking is still live with an assessor. It's not just with a computer, because obviously there's no, I don't think artificial intelligence is really up to scratch yet to be able to determine whether someone's speaking ability is up to scratch in a certain language. So basically, when you complete the MOD Language Assessment Board, you will achieve certain competency levels in all 4 of the areas. So basically, the most basic one you can get is survival, which will give you 1 SLP point per area. So you can get survival basically in all 4, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, which will give you basically 4 SLP points in total. Then we have functional, which gives you 2 points, professional 3, and expert 4 points. Obviously, the better you do in each area will give you more points in total, which will then, of course, affect the financial reward that you get, which I'll touch on shortly. So the financial incentives for the languages, it differs between the basic language award scheme and the defence operational language award scheme. And this is obviously dependent as well on the level that the service person would achieve on the MOD Language Assessment Board. And it's made up of 2 parts. So an initial award, which they would receive when they actually get their results for their ModLab, and then the active use award, which is like a daily rate of pay, depending on whether they're using the language here in the UK or if they're using it deployed overseas on operations supporting the MOD. So the basic language award scheme initial reward is dependent on the difficulty of the language in which the person, service person, has done has completed the mod lab, and also the total SLP points which they have achieved. Whereas the Defence Operational Language Award Scheme initial award, this is bracketed into the 3 higher competency levels, so functional, professional, and expert. So basically, if they're unable to achieve functional as a minimum, they will not be considered as a linguist or having a language capability under DOLAS. So, or the Defence Operational Language Award Scheme. So, unfortunately, they would still get a financial award, but this would only be issued under the basic language award scheme. The one good thing about the DOLAS award is that it's not affected by the difficulty. So even if it's one of the easier languages, which is considered one of the DOLAS languages, it will still attract the same award regardless. So you can see here on the screen now, we've got the financial incentives for the basic language award scheme. So if a service person was to only achieve 2 points, so let's say they were to get survival in just speaking and listening, but they weren't, so they got a 0 in reading and writing in one of the easiest languages, they would get an initial reward of £144. And I should, where it says here, re-qualification increment after 3 years. So basically, after 3 years, the service person must resit the exam in order for it to stay on their personal record. Otherwise, that then it expires essentially. So if they were to re-qualify and get the same level again, they would get 1/3 of the initial award for that language. Now, it is possible, if somebody is multilingual, though, they can qualify in a different language once every 12 months. So they can't sort of do, a mod lab in German 1 month and then do it in Spanish two months later. They have to wait at least 12 calendar months before they're able to get themselves qualified in an additional language. But if they are, a native speaker, let's say somebody has grown up speaking Polish or Spanish or German, and they manage to get experts in all 4 areas, they can attract depending on the difficulty of the language, their initial award can be up to £2,304. Unfortunately, all these, awards, they do attract income tax. So it will be added onto their monthly pay and attract tax as normal. So under the Defence Operational Language Award Scheme, so the ones which are more in need, as you can see, they do attract a much higher initial award. So if somebody was to get, but like I said earlier, the points are bracketed, so it's not per point. That it depends on how much the award is. So if they get 5 to 9 points, they are deemed to be a functional linguist in that language. If they get 10 to 12 points, this is professional, and then 13 to 16 points, they're considered expert. However, they would have to then get 3 or more points across all 4 areas, so listening, reading, speaking, and writing. If they do get, this highest one, then they will, get an initial award of £1,700. And if they're able to maintain that highest level for the next 3 years, and when they come to re-qualify after 3 years, then they get 1/3, so £3,600. However, if they were to initially qualify at functional level, so only get 5 to 9 points, but then they were to 3 years later improve their skills, and they were to then move up to professional, their re-qualification would then be the difference between the initial award at functional, and then and the initial award at professional. So they would then get a much higher increment, requalification sum. So and then obviously the active use award, which is when you're using the language on a daily basis for your duties. Under functional, you get £9 a day, and this is paid 30 days throughout the month as a member of the armed forces. You would be expected, or you might be required to use that any day of the week. So it is paid 30 days of the month. So if you get functional, then you'd get around £217 additionally a month. And then obviously for professional and expert, that rate does increase from £16.20 all the way up to £23.40. At the bottom, you can see the deployed active use. Now, although this is generally for the DOLAS languages, if one of, like I mentioned earlier, if one of the BLAS languages, one of the basic language award schemes, so this could be anything. This could be Polish or Ukrainian. If it was to be identified as an operational requirement, let's say that there might be something going on in Eastern Europe, and the service person has a qualification in that language. If they're, say, a professional speaker, if they were to deploy and use that language, then they would be earning that additional £16.20. So all right, they're at home at their in the UK at their home units. They're not getting paid anything. They would have just received that initial award under the BLAS scheme. But then if they're required to deploy somewhere in support of operations, that language for that period would be awarded under the DOLAS scheme. So that's why it's still so worth it for the service personnel who have any additional language skills to get them approved, get themselves tested using the mod lab, the MOD Language Assessment Board, and getting them on their personal record, so that if required, they can be exploited by the MOD. So moving now on to the long language training pipeline. This is generally for specific linguist roles in the armed forces. In order to be eligible to go on a long language course, a service person must first pass what's known as the Modern Language Aptitude Test. Because the reason for this is the language training conducted by the MOD is done in such a way, and is so intense that they have to be certain that the person has that aptitude in the first place to be able to learn the language in the way that it is taught by. It's extremely intense, so they have to be able to establish whether this person can actually succeed on one of these courses. Funnily enough, absolutely no previous language experience is required. So there could be somebody who may not have grown up speaking a second language, or they may have just had very limited exposure to modern foreign languages, whilst they're going through school. But some people's brains are just wired differently, and if they succeed on the MLAT, then it is highly likely that when they go and undertake long language training, they will excel at it. So, but yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the long language training does tend to only be undertaken by specific linguist trades. So the MOD will only invest in the language training for somebody who is then going to use that language for their day-to-day duties, or for supporting enduring operations. And for example, one of these trades is the operator technical intelligence in the Army's intelligence corps. However, there are obviously trades in both, in also the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force, such as the Royal Navy's communications technician linguists and the Royal Air Force's intelligence analyst linguists. So the long language training is usually only conducted for the Defence Operational Language Award Scheme languages, so the ones we touched on earlier, which are Arabic, Russian, Dari, Farsi, and Somali. And the course, like I said, is very intense, so it will last between 18 and 24 months. So, if you think, trying to get somebody who has never spoken this language before, written it, or being able to read it, then getting them to almost university standard within 18 to 24 months sort of gives an idea of how intense this training is. These language courses will take place either at the Defence Centre for Languages and Culture in Chicksands or in Trimmen. So depending on which language it is, can depend on the location where the service person will then have to undertake the training. Like I've alluded to earlier, is highly intensive training, and the personnel must be, give it, they must be 100% committed to learning the language and remain focused at all times. I think that pretty much goes without saying. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the Operator Technical Intelligence Linguist, or the OPTIL. So this is a trade in the British Army's Intelligence Corps. So they're not only linguists; they are also highly skilled in the sort of analysis and communications network, as well as the language in which they have been trained. So they are essentially using their highly technical skill set to trying to think of what the best terminology to use is to intercept basically communications, and then exploit them. And regardless of whether you're abroad or doing your at your home unit in the UK, this trade will receive the Daily Active Use Award, as I mentioned earlier. So they are, they do that extra language pay on top of their normal service pay, without the requirement for them to go abroad to earn it. Like I mentioned earlier, there are other trades in the MOD, such as in the Navy and in the RAF, where they will have a similar skill set. So basically, in summary, for my presentation, we've covered the language schemes in the UK Armed Forces. We've talked about the MOD Language Assessment Board, the ModLab, the financial incentives, which are open to service personnel for using their languages, whether that be under the Basic Language Award Scheme or the Deployed Operational Language Award Scheme. And we've also talked about the Operator Technical Intelligence role in the British Army's Intelligence Corps. So thank you everybody who has attended this part of the webinar. This now opens the floor up to any questions from any of our attendees. So please feel free to pop them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them for the next few minutes. Okay, so we've got a question from Lucia, who's asking if they have a Bachelor of Arts in Modern Languages, if they'd still have to undertake the initial test. So basically, if you do have a degree in a particular language, yes, you would then still have to do the MOD Language Assessment Board. That is completely separate from any sort of academic qualifications. However, that degree in that language would be a very good justification to take to your chain of command. So like I say, you would not have to necessarily be in the army or any of the other armed forces as a linguist. But let's say you wanted to get your language recorded and you wanted to receive that financial award, you'd go to your chain of command. You would say, look, before I joined up, I did a degree in a particular language. I want to get it tested, so that I can have it recorded on my personnel record. And they would not really be able to say, no, you can't undertake the language assessment board. So in answer to your question, Lucia, Yeah, yes, you would still have to take, you would still have to do the mod lab, but it would be of no, sort of cost to yourself. It's all funded by the MOD. Hopefully that answers your question. Um, a question from Eddie. How do you think it would be best to give an equivalent civilian qualification for mod lab qualifications? Presumably with the Army mod lab doesn't mean much. There is actually a scheme now in place, Eddie, to accredit language qualifications. So there are forms to fill out. You'd go to your in the army, the Army Education, I think it's called an LEC now. It's not an Army Education, so Learning Resources Centre, LRC. Sorry, you would go to them and show them that you have achieved a certain level in your MOD language assessment board, and they would then show you the procedure for accrediting that as a civilian qualification. So you could then, use it basically when you were to leave the armed forces. I don't know the exact details about it, but I know that there is, in the past, people were saying like, okay, I've got this language qualification, but yeah, I think the best place to talk to, the best point of contact would be the Learning Resources Centre or the Education Centre as they previously were known. Hopefully that answers your question. Let's see what else we've got on. Okay, so Lucia, you ask, I'm foreign with my ILR. I've been living in the UK for 13 years. So basically, so it doesn't matter if somebody was born overseas, if they are a naturalised British citizen, and which for one of the I think requirements for that is to be resident in the UK for a minimum of 5 or 10 years, 5 years. So I don't know off the top of my head. So yeah, you would initially have to become a British citizen, but it wouldn't be an issue. I have foreign heritage myself. Both my parents are Eastern European, and it had absolutely no impact on even me joining the armed forces in the first place, or indeed becoming an operator in the intelligence corps. So there is obviously a vetting process that you have to go through, but to dispel any sort of worries or myths that if you have any foreign connections, is that there are particular foreign connections which may have more of an impact than others. But for somebody from shall we say Western or Central Europe, that never tends to be an issue. Hopefully that answers your question, Lucia. No problem. Do we have any more questions? So I'll leave the question answer open for a few more minutes. If we don't have any more questions in the next 5 minutes, then I will end the webinar. Another question from Karine. Is French still being taught on an intensive course at Scrivener? Not that I'm aware of. However, like I said earlier, French, you can learn French if you wish to use what are known as your standard learning credits. However, French, I think French is still being used as an operational language, not sort of under the DOLAS scheme. But if somebody has French, because we are doing a lot of sort of working, with French forces, like a lot of joint exercises, and there is, always a bit of a language barrier. So I don't think the requirement for French is as intense as it used to be. However, it would still be, beneficial for anybody who has French at a decent level, spoken even, to get it recorded on their personal record. If that hopefully answers your question. Then we've got another question from Maggie. Are there past papers to assess own language proficiency? Right. So basically, yes, I think you basically, when you apply for the mod lab, they will send you like a sort of trying to think of the word now, an example papers of what to expect. So most of the mod lab, if no one has ever done one before, it is mostly multiple choice. So for the three sort of, shall we say, well, apart from writing, you do have to type in the language. So like I say, it's all online now. In fact, no, sorry, you don't have to type it. So you are under exam conditions. You have to have the webcam on yourself. You also have to have a mobile device sort of filming you from the back to make sure you're not committing any academic misconduct. And yes, the NATO agreement. Yeah, so basically the SLP levels, they come on what's known as STANAG. What that actually stands for evades me at this moment. But yes, so there is the standardized language profile is a NATO qualification, but like Eddie asked earlier, they sort of like to have us, qualified, but there are things being put in place in order for us to have our language qualifications accredited, so they are recognised in the civilian workplace. So for those point English academic qualifications, I think if you were to achieve level 4, that would be basically it would be a degree level. So because level 4 is essentially native speaker. So I've never actually done a language as a degree at university. But yeah, I haven't had any of my languages accredited. I've never actually sort of applied the process myself. But yeah, so like I say, to get the highest level, that essentially, is on par with a native speaker, a highly educated native speaker as well. So I'd say most people in the UK, if they were to do a mod lab in English, they would probably get somewhere around professional, but not necessarily. As I say, most people, certain people, not everybody in society has the highest level of English. Should we say, you just have to go on any sort of chat on social media, and sort of see people's basic spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So to get level 4 in a foreign language, that means your spelling, punctuation, and grammar would be exquisite, essentially. Another question from Kareem. Do we still run survival language courses for beginners? Not that I'm aware of. However, if there is a particular deployment and they cannot trawl somebody, or they don't have there isn't somebody who is deployable, let's say for medical reasons, they will still train personnel on a survival. There's when I say survival course, as in the survival level in that language for a particular deployment. Hopefully that answers your question, Kareem. So we've got another question from Francesca. Is there an age limit to join the British Army? Yeah, so the British Army, as long as I've served for quite a while myself, it used to be for a long time 33. However, I think the best place to go would be to go on the actual Army Jobs website. That you would get all the sort of genuine information from there. I don't know off the top of my head. I think it may have been increased to 36, but please don't take my word for it. I know it was 33 for many years. However, I think they may have, increased to 36 right now. So hopefully that answers that question. Obviously, the British Army, to be a linguist, I do think the rates of pay for the operator technical intelligence, like the sort of the base pay before the languages are taken into account, they are on a slightly higher pay band than those in the RAF. So I hope that answers your question, Francesca. No, Kareem. So yeah, in answer to your question, due to budgetary reasons, there is in fact a shortfall um, for linguists, in order to get the people trained up. So there is absolutely no budgetary constraints. So people, if somebody is able to achieve SLP4, they will, they will be given it, and they will be held on to like the unicorn essentially, because we are in need of the highly qualified linguists. Obviously because of the intense training, there are could potentially be issues, for people attaining their required clearances. There is absolutely no quota of candidates. It's not like there is space for everybody who is able to conduct the training, pass the training, achieve all their required clearances. That there is space for all of them in the army and across the armed forces. To work in linguist roles. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, no problem, Kareem. Glad to answer your question. Hey everybody, so we've got about 2 minutes left on the time for the webinar. I don't think it's going to sort of self-terminate or anything, but if there are any more questions I could answer quickly. If not, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending this evening's webinar, and I'd like to wish you all a very pleasant weekend. Okay, thanks everybody once again for attending, and I'm going to stop the webinar now.